Yeah, Magda is here.
Recording is on.
Okay, so they started recording. We still have a few minutes on technical things. I guess that our panel will go until 10 p.m. or so, 10 p.m. or 10:30. And majority of our guests also have their own individual collections and panels and other stuffs. But this is our community thing. Great, we have a crowd.
Are all these blank quadrants just like people in the audience, or are these other panel members?
No, those are people on the audience.
Okay.
That would be a terrifying panel. Like,
It would be.
Yeah. Everybody would get a half of a word. Like, done. That's your time.
It would look like a standard open air project meeting, if you ask me.
Yeah. Our discussion on a scientific ground, I guess. All right. So last minute checkup.
I'm assuming that for bandwidth reasons, there's going to have to be sort of a ceiling on the number of people that can drop in. Am I right?
Yeah, but in case of some problems or exceeding this limit, we will have a backup, and we have recording. So we try to manage. Okay, so let us start. Hi, welcome to the Konline panel on end of limits and limits of hope, a panel on science fiction, science, hope, progress, and other marvelous things. My name is Marcin Zarod, and here are our guests. So somewhere I had alphabetical order. Okay, so we will start with Krystyna Chodorowska, a Polish writer, a fan, and a telecoms engineer.
No, that's Magda.
Linguist. Sorry, it's Magda. And linguist by training, and data something.
Data person.
Data person by trade. Okay, and we have Magdalena Kucenty, also something very complicated, telecommunications by training, and a writer and story designer for computer games, including Cyberpunk 2020. And we have Wojciech Orliński, our resident pessimist-lemologist, ex-journalist, and at this moment a teacher of chemistry. And we have Peter Watts, a writer, a cat lover, a biologist by training, and what else? So let us start with somewhat let us start with somewhat problematic question, but we need to go through it. Do you like science fiction? You could be writing it, you could be living off of it, but not necessarily like it.
I don't like all science fiction.
Okay. So let us start with you, Peter.
I think it's importance. I mean, I like science fiction because pretty much by definition, it's the only genre out there that was sort of built from the rivets up to explore issues of technological change.
Okay.
If you write a story which is at all speculative on a technological or genetic level, it pretty much has to be science fiction by definition. That said, I think its role and its importance in shaping society has been self-servingly overstated, shall we say.
Okay. How would you comment, and what is your stance, Magdalena?
I really hated it in the past when I was much younger, because of misconception that science fiction is space opera.
Okay.
Like, you know, I'm not a Star Wars fan. Sorry, you can kill me for that, but I don't like Star Wars, and I don't like Stargate or any of that. So I'm not a huge fan of all the space operas and those stories that, for me, it's just fantasy in space, and I prefer just fantasy than fantasy in space. But then I started to read Lem, and I started to read Gibson and Dick and many other writers, and I fell in love with science fiction. I was like, oh my god, it can be so clever and so it widens your horizon so much, and I felt like there's a whole new world I haven't discovered yet. And I love it now, right?
Okay, so we have this kind of overstating the importance of science fiction, and we have this promise of undiscovered country, unknown lands, this kind of allure. And what about you, Wojciech?
Well, I wouldn't be here if not for my eternal love for science fiction, which goes on for, I think, half century. I guess, yeah. The first book I was reading as a very, very young boy were mostly science fiction. Not all of that was quality science fiction, the kind I appreciate today as a critic. I read also a lot of pulp, which was. Communism had its downsides, but it also had a very decent pop culture. So there was some pulp involved. I could give a whole lecture on cheap pulp sci-fi of communist era, and well, that would be a good idea for another panel. But I started to my love with books started with love of science fiction, and it never fade away. And I'm not so much. I never was so much fond of fantasy, because okay. Here's my reasoning. Like, science fiction sets certain limits. You cannot load basic laws of physics. So when in fantasy books, when you have magic, when suddenly dragons can solve all your problems, or in the Harry Potter universe, suddenly in volume 3 you discover that they have a gadget to warp back time, and
yes, sorry.
So if you can put that kind of Deus ex machina, already the ancient Greeks were complaining that that's too easy to solve a problem. So science fiction sets you certain rigid limits, and I enjoyed from the very beginning when we had a stranded astronaut.
Okay. So we have this kind of what I pick up from your answer is this idea of science fiction as this kind of literatura pierwsza, first literature, something that you make connection in a young age, and it actually builds your whole understanding of fiction.
Yeah, that's I started. I moved to my mainstream fiction from.
Obviously, you could move to other types of fiction, but for some people, me including, science fiction is kind of the home ground.
That's me.
As the saying goes, the golden age of science fiction is 12. Okay, and what about you, Krysia?
For me, it was pretty much the exact opposite of what Magda was describing just a moment ago. I used to love science fiction when I was about 12 and 14 and 16 and 20 and 25 even. I think I was in my 30s when I became a bit disillusioned with science fiction. At first, I used to love it because there was science, there were computers, and there were robots, and there were ideas I considered innovative. And people were putting their imagination to imagine hypothetical worlds, hypothetical changes to society, and that fascinated me to no end. But the older I was, the more book I will have read, I would gradually discover that sometimes people would invent those elaborate worlds with space travel and nanobots and self-replicating machines and artificial intelligence and singularities and whatnot, and they would use it to write a completely predictable generic plot about boy meets girl, or a disgraced heir has to fight his jealous uncle to regain the throne of his kingdom, and you know the drill. And it became harder and harder to find stories that were actually innovative and that really put the science to good use.
Okay, I see what you mean. Are there any tropes in SF that you feel overused? That's
maybe not the tropes per se, but a lot of people are expecting certain elements in a science fiction novel to consider the novel science fiction. Spoiler time.
This is one quick information. This is open spoiler panel. We are discussing literature, and we will be spoiling everything.
Soylent Green is people.
Yeah, basically Soylent Green is people.
So I have been working on a story for an anthology, and I wrote the story. I handed it out to people to be my beta reviewers, and I asked them what they thought about the story, and they said the story is all right, but there's one big problem with it. People are going to say it's not science fiction. I said, but why? It has autonomous drones that look for lost people. We don't have that kind of technology right now. And people said, yeah, but we don't know that. Everybody has an annoying neighbor who gave his son a drone, and the son is playing with the drone all day long. And they think, well, if that kid has a drone, then rescue services and the army surely have even better drones. And who says they do not have autonomous drones that can rescue people on their own? Even if we do not have that right now, it doesn't look exotic enough to qualify as science fiction in people's eyes.
Well, I would say that we probably have autonomous drones that are capable of killing people on their own.
Yes.
The reason we don't have autonomous drones that are capable of saving people on their own is a very good argument for that. The military simply doesn't care about that.
Yeah.
I think it's too pricey. Saving people isn't the priority. Killing them is.
It's more difficult. It's more difficult to find a single person without a life jacket floating in the ocean than to find a group of conspirating Taliban terrorists.
Or a wedding party.
Yes, they're interchangeable. Yeah.
I mean, my understanding is that they did some post hoc analysis of Obama's record on the extrajudicial drone strike front, and apparently, 90% plus of the kills were civilians.
I actually heard kind of another take on this critique because some chief of drone assassinations command was on hearings on Congress, and he was asked how many civilians do drones kill, and he answers none. Why? Because if you look in the American military records, if you are killed by a drone, you by definition become a terrorist. You simply cannot be at the same time a victim of a drone strike and a civilian.
We did the same thing in Canada when it came to the seal hunt. There was this big protest movement against the killing of harp seal pups. So the government of the time basically defined every seal pup that was more than 14 days old as an adult. Problem solved.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so
nice to see there's a general solution that fits all species.
So we have this kind of the strength of administrative realism, I would say.
Yeah, it's like guilty before proven, killed before guilty.
Yeah, nice saying. Okay, so we are reaching in some of your answers. I found this venue that it may be harder or more interesting to write SF when the gap between contemporary and the gap between a future is closing. So it's really hard to say what is possible or viable based on our scientific status today, as opposed to this classic era. So do you share this sentiment, or do you disagree with it and say, for example, that the more we know about the world around us, the more undiscovered lands for SF we have?
Can I start?
Yeah.
For me, it really depends on the context, because, for example, I strongly disagree with Wojciech that sci-fi is bounded by physics of law, because many people claim to write sci-fi or use sci-fi elements in their films, literature, whatever, and it's not sci-fi, it's technobabble. So you can do it. Okay, I don't like this science fiction, but it still gets the tag. It still can be the dragon, still can be there. It's just called something different. Like in Marvel movies, everything is quantum. And they claim it's science, but it isn't really, right? But so they can do it, and some people would buy it, especially children, because
so one answer would be that science fiction is not really a kind of literary venue, but just an aesthetic. So if you name something a quantum instead of magic, then we have sci-fi, not the fantasy. That would be.
I would disagree with that. I think that simply taking fantasy and slapping quantum on it, and to give the Marvel universe their due, they actually made a point of that and kind of, mocked themselves. That doesn't respect the fundamental premise of science.
Okay.
I don't think, I mean, science, what we consider to be factual science, changes. From day to day. We discover stuff, 20 years ago, people thought the universe was going to collapse into a big crunch, right? Like these things are in constant flux. What stays the same is the rigor with which we approach the questions.
Okay.
And there is a I don't know how popular it is over there. There's a movement called Mundane science fiction. Hands up, everybody who's heard of it. Okay, it's basically, yes, Christina, you never let me down. It's basically a movement that says all science fiction should be so rigorously grounded that none of it actually breaks any of the laws of physics or biology as we know them today. And I find that a profoundly anti-scientific viewpoint. They claim to be sort of hewing to scientific rigor, but their assumption is, the unspoken assumption is, that we've already discovered everything. That none of our scientific truths will be proven to be wrong. That we are basically the pinnacle of scientific discovery, and that is a profoundly closed-minded attitude. I think that there's a reason they call it science fiction, and not just writing an essay. So I think that the premise of not to say this is true or this is going to happen, but suppose this was the case, what would be the consequence? And you take that presupposition, whether it be faster than light travel or rewiring human nature or whatever, and you apply scientific rigor starting at that point and say, how does that play out? And that, I think, is where science fiction has its most useful role, at least in a societal term.
So that would be kind of speculative fiction or philosophical tale in which one of the assumptions based on science was just changed. You just tell a solidly thought story, but by changing one or few premises or axioms.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there that says we're going to imagine faster than light travel because we want to tell a story about aliens and we want a Western in space and we want it to be an exciting story.
Yeah.
That's skiffy. That's science fantasy, whatever.
Yeah,
science fiction says we're going to assume that there's faster than light travel. What are the ramifications? We use the premise. In both cases, the premise may be nonsensical according to our sense of physics. But in one case, you simply use it as an excuse to tell a rip-roaring yarn, and there's nothing wrong with that. But on the other hand, you use that premise as a seed from which you explore something.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of like socially. I cannot.
Sociologically.
Socially. I cannot.
Sorry, it's my
Sorry. My tongue is broken.
To say this.
Okay, social sci-fi, like my favorite type.
Sociological sci-fi.
Yeah, with its own physics. I really love that kind of sci-fi, and I totally agree that, I for example, I don't think that Marvel is science fiction. Don't get me wrong. I just think that it can be in many places it's described as science fiction. Like you go on a movie page and there's sci-fi tag there, which makes my heart bleed. and that's the same in the shop. It's on the sci-fi shelf, which is ridiculous for me, but like I said, it's context, it's point of view. For somebody, it could be sci-fi. For me, it's only fiction.
Okay, so we are narrowing it down, the science fiction definition. So we are not really in the area of pure aesthetics. And just for the sake of this panel, we are moving to this kind of, approach that breaking some axioms of science, but taking those axioms and consequences with scientific rigor.
So I would just break.
So let's go to Wojciech because I fear.
Just to defend myself, obviously in science fiction also you can have no boundaries, or you can. Jacek Duchaj, a Polish writer, is very good in mixing fantasy and science fiction, and magic and science. You can do it, but at least in science fiction there's a possibility of a boundary, and the possibility is what I enjoy. Even as a child, I just hated fairy tales because everything can happen. So for me, I wanted my story to have some logical boundaries, because when a genie grants you 3 wishes, why nobody says I want more wishes? Like that would be my first wish if I had it. So it always, I could never feel into a story in which everything can happen. So in science fiction, at least you can have limits. Sometimes you don't have them, of course, but my very favorite writers like Lem or Peter Watts are the writers who can make good boundaries and fit the story within them. So sorry, that's
yeah, but sorry, Krisha, go.
I just wanted to ask Wojtek if he remembers the Disney version of Aladdin from the 90s, not the most recent one. It was what happens is that people do not say I want 3 more wishes precisely because there are limits. And in the movie, it's parodied in the scene where the genie said, okay, I'll grant you 3 wishes, but you cannot wish for more wishes, and you cannot wish to be immortal, and you cannot wish for this and that and that. And he produces a stack of paper, which is like 15 meters long. and he says, okay, these terms and conditions apply now for your 3 wishes. So.
Yeah, I would say it's just more typical for science fiction to build the world around some limits, around some boundaries and physics of law of physics. Physics of law, that sounds weird. And often in fantasy you don't have these limits, but it's not like impossible. Good fantasy also has limits. For me, it's just so hard to write a good fantasy. That's why I'm so overprotective.
Okay, but this panel is not about the fantasy. This panel is not about magic. And this, if you wish to discuss those things, go elsewhere. This is the power of moderator. And I wish to expand slightly on this theme and ask again my question. Do you find it harder to speculate about the boundaries or axioms in our world compared to the kind of, the birthplace or the classical times of science fiction, be it 30s, 50s, 70s, 90s? Do science fiction basically grow with the growth of science, or science fiction is kind of bound eternally to some tropes and kind of, basic problems like jetpacks and time travel?
I've just read a bunch of essays edited by Gerard Westphal, I think. It's called Why Science Fiction Fails to Predict the Future.
Yes.
It's available for free on the internet, by the way. It's available on Google Books. Go read it. It's an awesome read. And he names the fallacies of the most common fallacies of science fiction. I think there are 7. And one I was going to refer to was based on something Peter said about the mundane science movement and people who require that science fiction adhere to our understanding of science and the laws of physics as we understand them now, etc., etc. And I think people who try to do that are especially prone to the fallacy of extrapolation, as Westphal calls it. And this is the assumption that an identified trend will always continue in the future in the same manner. I think Robert Heinlein, in one of his works, I don't remember which one was that, he noticed that with time, in human history, it was progressively more and more acceptable to wear less and less clothing. So he concluded that in the near future, it would be totally acceptable to go out in the nude and nobody would mind.
Yeah, the presumption of linearity of social trends. I try to kind of kick it out of the heads of my students. Just because something happened more or less linearly in the last 20 years, it doesn't mean that in the society it will remain, because societies do not have to be linear.
Yes. And he mentions a scene from a spy movie from the 90s. I don't remember the title, but there is a scene where the characters talk to each other on payphones. And these are science fiction payphones. They have a lot of buttons and they have blinking lights and they have video screens and the character can see each other. And I remember it used to look pretty science fiction to me. I thought, wow, it really looks like the future. And I didn't expect, nobody in the 90s did expect that payphones would become obsolete. And people would indeed be able to see each other on video screens in the future, but not on a payphone.
Okay, that said, one of my favorite scenes.
Before we go to our next panelist, Krysia, could you look for this pack of essays and post a link to it on our chat?
Sure.
When another person talks? Okay, so Peter, please continue.
This is just sort of like a bit of a digression. One of my favorite scenes in Gibson's Neuromancer is when Case is in an airport and the payphone next to him rings and it's the AI.
Yeah.
And he hangs up and he walks down the hall and every payphone that he passes rings exactly once. And I mean, obviously it was a completely shitty prediction, but it was a great piece of writing and it gave me chills. And that's something I think that we probably should keep in mind, is that we are wired for narrative as mammals. And there is a tendency, I think, amongst a lot of us, and I include myself in this, to say, wow, what a cool idea. Let us extrapolate this idea. Let us create characters which serve as mouthpieces for different aspects of the idea. and that can stop interest dead, and it can stop the plot dead. I think that the idea that science fiction is primarily the literature of ideas, when you say that too often, you start to downplay the importance of character. And characters, I think, character and plot are things that are really essential to keep people engaged.
Okay, so it's not really about the boundaries and axioms of science. It's more about just plain old narratives, but situated in somewhat changed realities or futures.
I think everything we do is more easily internalized by the recipient if it's as a narrative. I mean, we are not programmed to understand residual plots and discriminant function analysis. We are programmed to read faces. We're really good at reading faces. So there's this whole statistical technique called Chernoff faces that actually takes statistical parameters and interprets them as size of eyes and length of nose and so on, so that you look at basically a bunch of emojis and you can glean a fair amount of high resolution statistical data from just looking at faces. It's the same thing.
Okay, so let us pause on this one, because I have a question about it. So I agree with your take on the kind of narrative affinity of human brain, and perhaps even some human cultures generated by those brains. But my question would be, do you feel that this affinity for stories and narratives hamper our understanding, public understanding of the complex world that we are in? So at which point the narrative becomes obstacle in terms of cognition? Because not everything is easily narrated. Not everything is kind of, fits into our narrative patterns. It could be narrated. This is why we have authors, journalists, and so on. But not everything, including ecological problems, social problems, whatever, could be easily understood in narrative. For example, statistics is not easily narrative.
Somebody else want to go first? I don't want to hug the...
Okay. Wojciech?
So, well, I think this question is self-contradictory. Sorry.
Yeah, it could be.
That's like the question of what my room looks like when I close my eyes. Like, okay, I can check it. So you cannot go out from your narrative, because, I mean, maybe you can, but you cannot talk about it, because talking about it would be, of course, a narration. So we are all prisoners of our narration. I'm here as a pessimist. So I'm also epistemologically pessimistic. Like you have your narrative and you are framed by it, and you just cannot escape it. You can get out from your narration and narrate it differently. So once I realized it, I also thought that it's the narrative I'm stuck in. It's not that bad. I actually like this prison. So I'm not even trying. So I think your question is logically contradictory. Like you're asking about something that cannot be answered. It's a good question, but it's impossible to answer.
Even if there is something not necessarily narrative, we wouldn't understand it as such, because we are narrative.
And even if you understand it, you cannot you cannot reveal the world, your discovery.
Yeah. You wouldn't find communication network. So if we are talking about language, could we ask the same questions for Magdalena?
Regarding the narrative, I would say, we cannot escape our narrative. And for example, if I have an idea for a really cool scene, at least cool in my mind, I will do everything to make it happen. If it doesn't make sense scientifically, or just like, I won't be forcing myself if it's purely stupid, but I will try to make it work, because it's a cool idea, cool scene, and it's the best way to sell your ideas to the reader. Make something entertaining. You can smuggle your deep, heavy thoughts into your literature, but you need to make it also compelling, right? So it cannot be all the heavy stuff. And regarding the things you asked before about what makes is it easier to write science fiction when we have all this knowledge, for example, for me it's the more I know, the more aware I'm of our limits. So it makes it, on one hand, easier to build those limits, build those compelling boundaries that Wojciech talked about in my literature. But on the other hand, I'm aware of those limits, and it sometimes makes hard to overpass them. Like Peter said about making those technological breakthroughs that break laws that we know. It's harder to go there because we know the laws.
Okay, and a similar question about the narrative, because I'm really interested in Krystyna's take on it. Are we really bound by our narratives? Is there anything else?
I think we are, if we want to sell lots of books.
Okay, that's fine.
Because as much as we hate it, most people are wired to think in narratives rather than numbers or statistics or anything else. People love narratives. And the essays I just linked on the chat, one of them mentions a vision of the future depicted in the cult movie Fritz Lang's Metropolis. It was not meant to be an actual vision of the future. His contemporary critics panned the movie. They hated it. They said that the plot was predictable, that everything was kitschy, and the characters were stereotypes. And the movie is still a cult classic because of how epic it was and how impressive the imagery was. And that's what stuck with people. It was just the storyline was just a vehicle to show us this impossibly huge, impossibly epic underground city, and the machinery that was slowly torn apart by the conflict between the people from the upside and the downside. And it doesn't really matter that the story was predictable as hell. It was still the story was still something to guide us on this tour through this underground city.
I see that Peter wishes to comment. So let me just pick up from this. So we have this sense of wonder, the sense of awe, the sense of greatness, or just being fascinated. But it is that some of us seek in narratives. Okay, so go for Peter.
I'd like to pull something out of my ass here. It just sort of occurs to me now. And I'm not necessarily defending it or promoting it, but what about the premise that there's actually such a thing as too much insight? The argument, your initial question is, does narrative limit the kind of insight and the kind of wisdom that we can derive?
Yeah.
When I was back in grad school, one of my professors was fond of it when he was talking about building ecological models. There was this big move afoot to basically try and model every fucking photon, in an ecosystem. And his argument, and I think it was a good one, was that if you create a model that's as complex as nature, it becomes as incomprehensible as nature.
Yeah.
And that the entire point of modeling is understanding, and therefore models have to be caricatures in order to have any utility. In the same way, deep learning algorithms have a constant problem with overfitting. On self-similar data. There's a paper that came out recently suggesting that dreams in humans are a form of injecting noise into the brain to keep our brains from overfitting on self-similar data. So maybe the question itself is misguided. Maybe we need to be able to caricaturize the environment in order to be able to squeeze any useful insights or information out of it. I mean, I'm probably wrong because I haven't thought about it much, but try it on for size.
Okay, I saw that Krysia slightly winked when Peter told about AI. So could you bring your professional expertise or professional naysaying to the overfitting?
Not really. There are ways to combat overfitting, but I don't think anybody would be interested in the technical solutions in how to avoid overfitting in deep layers by dropping every nth layer, or by using a self-attention span mechanism or some such. I was just involved in a conversation with a person in the chat room who complained about not having moving pavements.
Okay.
Which is lovely, because if I remember correctly, Robert Heinlein predicted moving pavements in one of his books or stories. Anybody had help? There was a story, a piece of work by Heinlein where there weren't any regular pavements anymore. People wouldn't walk; they would just stand, and the pavements would be like giant conveyor belts everywhere. And
Asimov did that too.
And I think it was something he predicted correctly, because he predicted escalators, and we do have those.
But let us stop at this actual case, because let's drop the detailed minutiae of a moving pavement and see what's beneath this fantasy of moving pavements. Is it the fantasy of particular piece of technology, or is it a vision of a construction of a city designed for this type of moving?
I think that's another fallacy, which says that if a piece of technology is ever discovered, it's going to be used everywhere, and people are going to abandon the old ways of doing things. Which is
obviously it wouldn't.
We do have escalators, and one, they aren't everywhere. Point two, people haven't stopped walking.
And they didn't really change that much our city's design. I could easily point out several other factors that changed our cities.
That's a shame. I think our cities could use some changing, but that's another topic entirely.
Yeah, but not necessarily by escalators.
I think some science fiction, some catastrophic science fiction visions love to project a vision of the future where people are entirely corrupted by a new invention being invented and then applied everywhere. There are a lot of catastrophic visions where people are unable to walk. I think there was a story from the science fiction golden age. I think it was from the 30s. It was called The Passengers, and it was about a society which was so taken in by the various personal mobile technologies that there were that an entire cast of ruling people emerged who were unable to use their own legs, because they had moving chairs and motorcycles and Segway analogs and whatnot. I think, to use a more recent example, it was the same with the animated movie WALL-E.
Yeah, certainly.
So, yeah, the fat society on the driving seats, right?
So we've reached one venue or another source of SF. So some SF could be based on a fear of particular change. So some science fiction could be based on fears or possibly negative predictions.
My science fiction is based on fear. What else is there?
Yeah. So here comes my question: What other big drives do you have in your stories instead of fear?
My stories. Oh, sorry.
Go on.
Okay.
My stories always revolve around psychological aspects, like how we change as human beings when how technology changes us, and for what said Krisha about those extrapolation that were really simplified, no one will be walking, right? For me, it's a way for highlighting your idea, because if you write a book or a story where you tell that there are moving pavements, or there are those cards that everybody use, and then you will still write that most people are still walking and are healthy, and there are those few people that are crazy and using those vehicles, it won't have such an impact on the reader, because you need to embrace the fear you're basing your story on. So I think it's a tool of narration, really. You cannot make something too plain, because it won't get into people's head.
Okay. And Wojciech?
Well, obviously,
anything but fear?
Fear is my definitely favorite motivation in science fiction. My favorite stories and novels are based on it. But another very important, especially in science fiction, is simply curiosity. Trying to imagine what a conversation with artificial brain might look like, or what the world in the next 50 years would look like. So I think my favorite kind of stories are the combination of both parts, because I love the question. My favorite question is, what could possibly go wrong? Many things can go wrong.
Yeah, like in Lem's story, when he goes back in time, right? And he punched himself in the face because he's so annoyed with himself. That's just
and
great example of this curiosity. How would we react psychologically to space travel, not in this heavy way, but in this simple way? Do I like myself? No, I would punch myself in the face.
I think
cannot hear it.
What about you, Krystyna?
I think when the question was phrased as what other drives apart from fear do you have, I think there just simply isn't a better way to answer this question than quoting the last line of the movie Rogue One in my best Carrie Fisher voice. Hope.
Bring it on. Yeah, so you basically spoiled me, because I was reading The Myth of Pandora I just received a package of beer, and one of those beers is called Pandora, and it has
don't open.
And it has this lovely retelling of Pandora's myth that took my attention just before this panel. But it basically goes more or less that Pandora, as we know, was artificially created. So it was a golem or robot or whatever. And it was gifted by various Olympian gods with appropriate good and bad things. Obviously, Pandora opened the beer or the box, and all the miseries came out. But at the last pint or last corner of the box, there was a hope. So this kind of cycle between hope, curiosity, and fear and misery is kind of often told in Greek mythology, and then I would guess that similar myths could be found in other cultures, more or less.
Without hope, there's no fear. If you don't hope that it will be okay, there's no fear for the future, because it's only pain and darkness then.
Okay, so here we come to my question. How would you design, or what types of hope do you have in science fiction or in science, period. So where do you get your hope?
I think to a large extent, hope is wired into us.
Okay.
There is, a fair body of circumstantial evidence that suggests that when you evolve on essentially a meat grinder environment in which you're constantly in danger from predators and falling off of cliffs and conspecifics trying to beat you over the head and diseases, anybody who internalized a truly accurate vision of their odds of survival, much less their odds of surviving long enough to reproduce, would simply basically collapse into a little puddle of perspiration on the ground and wait to die. So we are, as a species, programmed to be delusionally hopeful.
Okay.
And
so basically, it's as natural as a fear, as a kind of balancing mechanism.
it is. I think it is a cognitive. It's a cognitive bias. There are other biases. There's a negativity bias, especially when you're young. It doesn't happen so much when you're old for obvious reasons, where we pay more attention to negative input than to positive input. The point is, we're basically wired to try and survive.
Okay, so
we will be at the mercy of biases, and I'm actually going to be talking about this a bit on Sunday. We are at the mercy of hardwired instincts that give us hope even when there is no rational grounds for hope.
Okay, so let us move beyond the assumption of subconscious or evolutionary mechanism. Let's stay on the conscious level. Where do you get your hope?
Well, I mean that I guess
yeah,
is my
you
point.
answered my question.
I don't need to get my hope anywhere, because I'm actually, we're in the middle of a plague. I'm actually pretty happy.
Okay.
I write stuff that a lot of people consider doom and gloom. I consider any story that actually shows a functioning societal infrastructure 80 years from now to be delusionally optimistic.
Yeah.
I am personally happy. My brain tells me that we're fucked. But I don't need to be asked where I get my hope from, because it's in all of us, I think. And it's not something you have to search for. It's something you have to work to eliminate if you want to be rational.
Okay. So what is your take, Wojciech? Because I see
I just agree that being hopeful is hardwired into our brains by evolution. Like probably we might have had an ancestor who never had any hope, and of course he had no children. So this ancestor didn't pass his pessimistic genes. We are the descendants of proto-humans who had hope. And especially when you're talking about fiction, about literature, about art, simply writing a book or even writing a short story involves a lot of hope that somebody will buy it, somebody will read it, somebody might even like it, somebody might post a hateful message on the internet. That's still cool. Like he read it, at least he cared enough to hate. So in the very act, even that we have this convention, it's like we came here hoping to have entertaining conversation. So I think no matter how pessimistic you are, if you are acting, you're still hopeful. If you lose your hope, you lose the ability to act, and then you probably need to be put in hospital care with severe depression. But as long as you're acting, you're being hopeful.
Okay, I see that.
Yeah, standing up in the morning is act of hope, really.
I always thought about waking in the morning as a kind of silent defiance without much hope. Okay, so we more or less agree that we are wired on hope as much as we are somewhat wired for fear or other things. So we move to next question: how science fiction could make use of this hope without falling to the happy idiot or marketing?
Actually, going by the essays from Westphal, a more common plot is actually a world filled with unhappy idiots. Because according to the author of this essay, science fiction loves to describe a world where a catastrophe, which is ravaged by a catastrophe because all the people were idiots, and they either waged a nuclear war or waged a regular war and killed everybody, or they poisoned the earth beyond recovery, or they brought on catastrophic climate change. The possibilities are endless. He mentions one of the more idiotic examples he encountered. It was the novel, I think, by Frederick Pohl from 1954, I think. It was called The Midas Touch. And it depicted a future society where most of the industry was, the earth was destroyed beyond measure. So the only thing that was, everybody were on the basic income because all the work was monopolized by robots, and the only thing that people were good for was consumption. So everybody had to consume all day long. That was all they had to do, and they hated it. And they were very, very unhappy, but they still did buy food, more food than they wanted, and that they had to eat it, and they bought clothing they didn't want, but they still had to buy it and try it on because that was what was required. And suddenly at the end, a genius person had this idea, why do we do it ourselves? Robots could do that for us. And it was basically an extreme example of a world filled with idiots. And the Westphal tries to challenge this notion of universal stupidity, saying that we didn't survive millions of years as a species because we were stupid. People are actually pretty good at working together and coming up with solutions when they feel an imminent threat. I thought he was being way too optimistic about that. Looking at the response to climate change, it gave me some doubts, but he brings up the example. If you tell people that fossil fuels will be gone in 50 years, people are not going to worry because most people will say, oh, wait, 50 years is a lot of time. I'm going to be dead by then and my children will probably be dead, so what do I care? If you tell people that fossil fuels will be gone in 2 years, that's a time horizon they can actually imagine, and they will get to work like nobody's business, and they will come up with a solution because that's what people do. They are very efficient in times of crisis. My only reservation in applying this to climate change is that when people get to work and try to employ their creativity and ingenuity to solving this issue, with a 2 years head notice, it might be too late to change anything. But
yeah, so. But basically, in every or in majority of dystopian or post-apo science fiction, you may say that there is a hope, because there is a hope that the functioning human society will still be, instead of just scrap-bearing semi-human groups or whatever. So yeah, in a way, there is a room for hope. But my question is, so one piece of hope or source of hope could be this construction that if we band together, more or less we will just figure it out. We'll solve it out as humans because in a mass we are sufficiently whatever to figure it out.
So, but Krystyna is dead on the money when she talks about the problem of time lags. Hyperbolic discounting says that if something, if we're given a choice between something that's just mildly inconvenient today versus absolute catastrophe in 10 years, we'll take the catastrophe in 10 years. And by the time it is 2 years away, the thermal inertia of an entire planet has been building for centuries. And there's no way you can undo that when the human gut kicks in and says, oh shit, we've got to fix this. Yeah. There's no way you can do things in that narrow period of time without breaking physics itself.
So let me kind of abstract it, because that is my role in this panel. Until the climate change, the human civilization more or less always figured out some solutions before the imaginary man with a hammer came, invented nitrous agriculture, invented electricity, invented whatever that made possible running away from the catastrophe. But maybe in the case of climate change, this is not the case. Maybe in the case of climate change, as you said, Peter, the thermal dynamics of the climate system is too slow and compared to human cognition. So when we notice something on a social political level, it will already be too late on the climate scale.
I think that our problem is that we weren't optimized for long-term thinking and planning.
Yeah, obviously.
We were evolved by quick stimuli, the fight response, and we are optimized for immediate gratification. Yeah, we're very bad at planning. We're very bad at delaying rewards. And
yeah, but nevertheless, as a civilization, we have tools that go beyond our cognitive reach.
Yeah, but the tools themselves, I mean, people were talking, for example, about carbon sequestration, right? There's a factory in Iceland that can pull something like 50 tons of carbon out of the atmosphere every year. Our annual carbon emissions are 37 billion tons. So you would have to scale that factory up by 340 million times. Yeah. Just to keep abreast of the emissions that we are already producing, which doesn't even make a dent in the backlog that's already in there. I mean, we've got the highest carbon content in the atmosphere than we've had for over 3 million years. Our tools aren't going to fix that, but I think there is a rational basis for hope, and that's changing human nature. Krystyna is absolutely right when she says, yeah, we are wired for immediate gratification. We can change that wiring. Victims of Parkinson's disease are less likely to be religious, for example. Think of all the evil religion has done. If you can somehow isolate the part of Parkinson's that makes people less religious and leave the rest of the pernicious shit on the ash heap, you can lesion certain parts of the brain and it makes people more ethical. There is a chemical called nociceptin in the brain which counteracts the effects of dopamine and which might actually reduce our susceptibility to instant gratification. There are ways of changing the chemistry of the human brain that might allow us to internalize long-term consequences the way we currently only internalize short-term ones.
To be completely fair, I cannot think of a single example of a science fiction work that would describe social engineering techniques aimed at making people more ethical that didn't go completely
dystopian, right?
Dystopian, yes.
Well, then you haven't read enough of my stuff. I am disappointed in you, Krystyna. I thought we were friends.
No. Sorry, I never thought about it that way. I was concentrating on when I was reading your works, I admit I was concentrating on the charmingly scientifical yet very disturbing personal quirks of individual characters. Not so much the social conditioning that was going on in the background.
Well, I've actually written a couple of stories that were, in fact, one of them was for the X Prize people, and they've never come back and asked me to do anything for them ever again. But it was like one of those, write science fiction to show how in 20 years, X Prize technology will have helped save the world. And I came up with a rewiring the human nature thing. And
let us slightly close the doom and gloom venue, because, I know that we have to go through it. But let us start with, kind of, we all gonna die in climate crisis, one or another, and move to some other questions.
Actually, I can name one example, and I think Wojtek would love it because it's a story by Lem. I think it's one of the.
I was just thinking about it.
Yes.
Okay, so since you bring it, that's a very interesting example, because Lem wrote it. It was published in a short story collection during Stalinist years, and Lem never allowed to republish it again because he was sort of ashamed, but because that's a shameful socialist propaganda. And the funny thing that he might have had a point in 1954. It's a story when scientists invent chemical that makes people altruistic and ethical, and in capitalist countries it results in an economical disaster because capitalism cannot function with ethical people. Like, nobody will cheat anybody, so how could the business go on? And socialist triumphs. And of course that's a horrible bad propaganda. But maybe there's a point. Like, maybe actually, in order to be more ethical, we might get rid of capitalism. Oh my God, I said it. So yeah, that's an idea that sounds very, very nice in this short story, but he never allowed it to be published again. So sorry, that's.
Actually, my favorite bit from Lem was the demonstration where the police uses love bombs on the protesters. And I don't know
Futurological Congress, but that's
for Future Congress. I don't know how the name of this invention was translated, but they were basically love bombs, and they made people more altruistic, more open, more honest, and generally better people. And when the love bombs were thrown into the protesting crowd, some agents of the secret police came up with a makeshift banner saying, "Hate on us, we're provocateurs."
I've got to read more Stanislaw Lem.
Okay, so that's one trick that we kind of find. We could dream in SF about changing human nature, changing human societies. So perhaps this kind of this is the sphere for what ifs, not the space travel, not the time travel, not the classical tropes. Mm-hmm. And obviously in Poland we have the history of this kind of tradition. Peter, you may be less acquainted with it.
Yeah.
But, from the Lamb and through the Zeidel, we have a kind of sociological science fiction period.
Ah, okay. Well, I think that kind of a perspective is probably more relevant to human survival right now than dreams of time travel and aliens on Zeta 2 Reticuli. If science fiction wants to be relevant long enough for us to see whether other science fiction predictions come true or not, that's definitely something that needs some heavy emphasis. Okay, so let us stop on that, and just for an exercise, let us imagine. Maciej Starzecki got it right, because he said that a lot of sociological SF was imagine that USSR is a little green man and see what happens. But what is really fascinating that for example, Limes Inferior by Zeidel got this kind of second reading in a mass invigilation era, although it was written in kind of previous political assumptions setting. But my question is another: if you are to imagine changed societies, changed human nature in a kind of next 100 years or 200 years, with a non-catastrophic solution of climate change or climate whatever, yeah. So kind of assumption that we have this more or less mass social organizations. My question is, how would science as institution function in your utopia? Not the school, not the everyday life, not the sex life, but whole adventure.
How would science function in a hypothetical future when we harnessed climate change?
Yeah,
I think
when we avoid that catastrophic level, extinction level.
It would get decent funding.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a point, but I guess what I'm tempted to say, perhaps because I am too hopeful, is that science would function finally the way the legend or science is, said to function, right? The idea that what you have are these rational analysis and people actually coming together in the arena of conflicting ideas, and it becomes more dispassionate, less about prejudice and more about curiosity.
Okay.
I mean, that's what it's supposed to be right now. Right now, the reason science works, I think, largely is because different groups of scientists hate each other's guts. And that's what peer review basically comes down to, right? You're always, if you've pissed off some guy, he's going to be waiting to like shit on your grad student at their defense, sort of thing. And a great deal. I mean, one of the things I've always been curious about is the extent to which personal animosity played a role in the Human Genome Project, because you had these two groups that were competing, and they didn't like each other at all. And that competition seems to have accelerated the completion of the Human Genome Project, at least the first draft, years before anybody thought it would happen. So there is this image of science as a bunch of sort of dispassionate Vulcans in white lab coats.
That's the
Whereas the truth is, it's really more of a Thunderdome type thing. Yep. Maybe if we have changed human nature, and if the results of that have been an accomplishment on the scale of taming climate change, then maybe we maybe we will be mature enough to do science as it was originally envisioned and as it is still sold to the naive.
I think that if we could beat down climate change, then science would finally get the respect it deserves. There is a chapter in Yuval Harari's 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, and there is a chapter where he ponders the role of religion in the 21st century, and it reads like absolute science fiction, because his conclusion is that religious leaders will always be less credible than scientists, because they are capable of admitting their own mistakes, and they are more elastic in their thinking, and they're willing to experiment and try new solutions, while the religious leaders stick to their guns and come up with new explanation why religion doesn't work and it doesn't solve people's everyday problems.
I agree with every argument. I totally disagree with his conclusion. I mean, look at the US. The scientists, science as a process is based on disproof. It's predicated on the assumption that everything you believe could be wrong. Who seems to be running things in the US? I mean, we got Biden in there now, but I was optimistic when Obama came in too, and look what a disaster that turned out to be. Fundamentalist religion is on the increase around the world. It's progressive democracy that seems to be on the ropes.
And exactly. I think the fact that science is capable of admitting its own mistakes, it's often held against science.
Yes.
People look at that and they say, well, scientists used to say one thing, now they're saying another thing. They do not even know what they're doing. We cannot trust those scientists.
Politics just say in that situation, no, I didn't say that at all. And everybody are like, okay, he didn't. Okay, I believe him. He's an honest man, right? Yeah, that's why I'm kind of pessimistic regarding future. If we beat down the climate changes, I think there will be just a sea of flat earthers and tinfoil hats, because people will be like, we said it will be all right. We got away with it. Everything is good. Those sciencey nerds were just scaring us because of the Illuminati stuff, right?
They're already doing that, right? They're already citing, hey, remember back in the 80s they said acid rain was going to destroy everything? Well, acid rain didn't destroy everything, so why should we take them seriously now? And the reason acid rain didn't destroy anything was because people actually got their asses together and stopped acid rain. But that just doesn't it doesn't factor in. I mean, again, religion, there's a very cool school of thought that suggests that religion has its basis in a category error for pattern matching that once helped us defend ourselves against predator attacks.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a pretty deep wire. Like you're not going to be able to rationalize people out of anti-predator instincts.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're up against. We're up against people who want to use the neocortex to control our instincts and to, control our behavior, versus the vast majority of people who just use their big shiny neocortexes to make self-serving, elaborate excuses for their instincts.
Yeah, and like we said, we are wired for hope. So people, for example, now people are saying, "Oh, but this winter is very cold, so there's no global warming, right? Because this winter is cold." And it's like, and in the US, actually, because of the ice melting, there are really harsh winters because there's on the map, it's shown that there's this cold wind going through states, and that's why the winters are harsh. But in reality, it proves that we have global warming because we lose the ice caps, and that's why winters there are worse. But for people, it's just simple. It's cold, so no global warming, right?
Just for the record, last week we had about the temperature was about 15 degrees Celsius in my city.
Wow.
So I went and checked the temperatures of the warmest and coldest February days for the last
record.
Yes, for about about as long as we go back, the 20th and the 21st century, and 15 degrees Celsius is not the warmest we've ever had in February. We used to have warmer days in 2008, but all the warmest February days are from the last 50 years, and all the coldest February days ever are from the 50s.
Yeah. So, but this panel, more or less, I guess, agree that our situation is not really the best possible and that the climate change is real. Because if somebody thinks that the climate change is not real and it's not a big social problem, then I guess that this somebody kind of, got into wrong panel.
Climate change is actually not a big problem.
Yeah,
climate change. If you actually look at the causes of species extinction and so on, most of it comes down to us just, kicking the shit out of natural habitats. And if we solve climate change, I totally agree with Magdalena here. If we solve climate change, we're gonna come up with a gray goo scenario. We're gonna have rogue AI. Something's gonna happen because none of these things are problems. These are all just symptoms of human short-sightedness.
Okay.
And if we actually want to prevent crises instead of just fighting rear guard reactively against each one as they occur, that's the problem we're going to have to address as human nature.
Okay. I see this point. Okay, and coming back to my question, because as a sociologist of science, I'm personally interested in visions of future science. What would you add to the mix? So one addition would be to slightly reduce the role of envy or aggression as a driving mechanism in science, and move it to kind of, more collaborative, more altruistic, more communal. Another proposition from the chat would be to kind of put some scientific objectives, not scientific truths, but kind of, the distribution of money, for example, up to public scrutiny, to make science more accountable to the wholly understood society, not in terms of, telling the truth, but in terms of, for example, science shops, citizen panels, and so on. What else could we add to the...
Well, I mean, the problem is that was exactly the rationale that was used over ClimateGate. The entire argument was we must keep science transparent. We must, and in the US, there are still all sorts of laws on the books that basically say we're not going to give you scientific funding unless you give the industries whom you are threatening access to all your data, right? So a lot of pernicious stuff can hide underneath the let us keep science transparent.
Yeah, and definitely the transparency, if it's not universal, then it ends up just kind of, favoring the more secretive groups. So, because it basically creates asymmetry of information. Scientists have to be open, but the lobbyists do not have to be. So,
good point, yeah.
So there is a structural advantage. Okay, so let's move away from this subject because enough of doom and gloom. We are coming slightly to the finish, and some of my closing questions. Please imagine that you are sufficiently advanced, post-human, cybernetic, whatever optimized goldfish.
Mm-hmm.
And you could fulfill one wish. What wish?
More wishes. My first wish is...
Yeah, okay, so we have answer from Wojciech. Assuming that you have unlimited number of wishes, what would be the key problem? What would be the kind of, the Schwerpunkt?
What?
There's no sense in living if you have unlimited wishes. After 5 seconds, you would just lose your will to stand up because you can have anything by a wish. Okay, for 2 weeks you would be partying, but then it would be very depressing.
For me, it would be end the economy of scarcity,
okay.
And then I would get on to thinking about the other two wishes.
Okay, so basically end up with scarcity economy.
You guys are so nearsighted. I would just want to see how everything ends. I want to see if we're heading for heat death. I want to see if some kind of, the filaments, the dark matter filaments between galactic superclusters are actually enough to pull us back together again.
Show me the end.
Yeah, I mean, basically we're in this story, right? And we wake up into this story and we're like on chapter 30, and we make it about 3 pages into chapter 30, and then we die. But there's an entire narrative arc there. I want to see how the story ends.
Okay, so show me.
Okay, but if you have infinite wishes,
that would be that Peter.
Oh, sorry.
And Magdalena, what would be your wish?
I still don't see the sense, because if you have infinite wishes that can do anything, you can be immortal and you can save the world, because Peter says he wants to see how it's ending. But if I have this all-powerful wish, I can go like, okay, I want to start over. I want to, be God of my new world and make it to my own vision. So,
but at which stage?
Too much power.
Formation of a planet core? Formation of primitive societies?
I think formation of primitive societies, because if I would go with planet core, it would just blow up, because I don't know the science behind it.
You know what would be cool? Checking if the whole agricultural revolution in the Neolithic age was really the point when it all went wrong. Just keep your societies hunter-gatherer and see what happens.
Yeah, just time travel, right? Like first wish, time travel, immortality, and you get yourself to the loop.
Okay, and we come back to Wojciech.
Well, because I like not only science fiction, but also parodies of science fiction. I'm just thinking of all the stories when those wishing scenario went wrong. And there's an episode of The X-Files when Agent Mulder meets a fairy who grants wishes, and all his wishes end up very bad. He wants peace on Earth. He wants global justice. Always there's a disaster. He ends up right.
There is no disaster. Let's assume that you have this kind of luxury of, the right future. What would be your wish?
I'm extremely personally curious. That's still the child in me. I'm so curious. Are there any aliens out there? So probably one of my first wishes would be a complete list of other civilization in galaxy with astronomical coordinates, what alien species were, and so on. I like. Because you said you don't like, Magdalena, you don't like space opera. Maybe I don't like reading it, but I like imagining it. I like play video game Stellaris and discover other species in a video game. And I'd love to have a list, a map of galaxy.
I must admit, visuals are great. I just don't like the stories.
And maybe you can use one of your infinite wishes to ensure that you never lose your sense of wonder. So addressing Magdalena's problem about, you just suffer from cat-like ennui and want to die after 2 weeks. No, just that's one of my wishes. I want to continue to have the same sense of awe and amazement at creation that I do right now, and I never want to lose that.
Stay hungry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we are coming to an end, and we see organizers have you noted the panelists' wishes. You know what to do. So for Peter, he wants to see the end of the universe. Krysia has even bigger dream to end of scarcity economy. Magda will just restart and start a new story, start a new version. And Wojciech will look for stories.
Aliens, just aliens.
Stories of other species. So more or less, this is the end of curated part of the panel. In a moment, we'll come to the questions from audience, and it will like this that please submit your questions to the chat. And then just mark who wants to answer it. Because if you all together start turning on microphones, it will be messy and we have to, or something. So, but until that, thank you, dear panelists and audience, for you and talking, the answering and avoiding part of the panel was Magdalena Kucenty, Krystyna Chodorowska, Wojciech Orliński, and Peter Watts. And just one last question. Do you have any questions for me? If you are to reverse the role and imagine that you are sitting on a similar panel in next 100 years, okay? So 200, 2120, there is a panel on science and science fiction. What question would you ask?
How did we beat up the global warming? Please describe it step by step.
Send the manual.
Send the manual, yeah, please.
Yeah?
I would ask, my grandparents told me about this thing called hope, but they could never really explain what it was. Tell me of this thing called hope and why it didn't work.
Good luck. That so it's good that our panel is recorded. Magdalena? Krysia, sorry.
Yeah, I already.
How do you get babies?
And Wojtek?
That's what got us into the problem in the first place. Too many babies.
A question personally to you. That's my compulsion. I'm wondering about the books behind you, of course, and of course the book behind Peter. I see some shelves. So
books behind me. Okay. Yes. So it's Introduction to Digital and Analog Circuits. So just Introduction to Electronics. Biography of Weber. Some history of anatomopathology. And some books on teaching sociology. Because I'm teaching a class on.
No 50 Shades of Grey? No. no.
Oh,
He keeps that under his pillow.
I curated the file. It's a deliberate, I anticipated this question.
It was supposed to be a real question to you, because the baby question was an alleged question I would ask 2,000 years from now, because this question is loaded. It contains sub-questions like, have you come up with an artificial womb yet? Do you use it? How do you divide parenting? Who takes care of bringing up the babies? How did it affect your social structure?
Yeah, how family is
huge.
organized.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a great question and great scope to future questions. So thank you very much for this panel. You've been lovely authors and guests of the panel. I just loved talking to you and loved to do it for Avantgarda. So I open up the questions from the audience.
I'm going to get another beer and have a pee. I'll be right back.
Yeah.
I will go for a tea. Sorry.
Yeah, so 5 minutes break and I will gather up the questions. Okay, so we could warm up with the first question. Do you think that humanity deserves to survive in the long run?
Who should answer it? Because I'm not sure.
We could start with you.
Okay,
Magdalena.
so do you think humanity deserves to survive in the long run? Not at all. But that's not a question of what we deserve. For me, it's actually really weird concept. People think they deserve something from life and they deserve punishment, and it's actually everything in our minds. So in our mind, we don't deserve it, but it doesn't matter because it's just my point of view. And actually, we deserve it if we survive by the law of nature.
Okay, we have a question for Wojciech. What is your favorite Stellarius civilization and society traits?
Well,
what societies do you create?
I mostly play as humans, so for me, my favorite scenario is that we are just exploring the space and making friends, like in Star Trek franchise. So I always play as human. In strategy games, I also play as Poland usually and lose as Poland. And as human beings, of course, I also often lose. But my favorite kind of civilization, the one I like to imagine about, are the failed empires. You know, the one that used to have some glory, but now they just cut off from space. Then they don't want to be bothered.
As humanity, you also play as Poland.
Yeah, yes, I imagine myself to be an astronaut of Polish origin. Sorry, that's why I said in the beginning, I don't believe it's possible to escape your narrative. I am who I am, and I'm not even trying to get out of it. I'm a Polish middle-aged guy, and I'm fine with it. And I play.
For both Peter and Krysia, how humans are motivated? What goals they aim for?
Well,
first,
biologically speaking, survival, continued survival, accumulation of resources, and reproduction. That's all there is, basically, and everything else is just sugarcoating on top of that. But
I would say,
whether addressing the question whether humanity needs to be saved, I think it should, because we are humanity and other humans are the closest thing to kin we have. We may have our differences, but we're still closer to other humans than, to say, amoebas or even other or mammals or symbians. So it is natural to want humanity to survive. And if somebody read the Free Body Problem by Cixin Liu, the scene where the astrophysics who is being kept in a labor camp as punishment, that moment where she contacts, when she intercepts transmission from the aliens, and she contacts the aliens with a reply saying, "Come here and enslave us because humanity is no longer capable of governing itself." It's the sign of her utter desperation and the deep psychological trauma she has as a result of the persecution she experienced. So yeah, I want humanity to survive because I'm human.
Okay.
Okay, Peter, go.
I would say I would agree with most of what you say, except for the "I want us to survive," and also the survival instinct. I think that our survival instinct is really an instinct for genetic persistence. If you could, for example, imagine a kind of cancer that made you super sexy to the opposite sex, and so highly reproductively successful, but killed you by the time you were 25, you would not survive very well, but your genes would certainly proliferate. I've got cats, I've got this old Tom who's like got to be pushing 20, but we had him fixed. So he hasn't, really had too many cats. He hasn't really had too many kids. You got some other tomcat who lives out on the street and dies at the age of 4 because he gets hit by a car, but he's had like 10,000 kids at that point. That's, I think, basically what matters. And to some extent, that's the problem. I think uncoupling what we want from those basic biological imperatives is absolutely essential to our long-term survival. I think in a weird way, if we actually want to survive, the best way to do that might be to stop trying so hard to survive, because a lot of those instincts that we are acting on, which were originally evolved because they had positive fitness consequences, are right now threatening our existence. And oddly enough, that also is something I'm going to be talking about on Sunday. But yeah, I think you pretty much summed it up, except you're too hopeful about people.
No, I think you're right on the money when you say that we are creatures that evolved on the savanna in the Stone Age, and we are still governed by those primitive impulses, which are not really suited to the challenges that are standing before us right now. So we need to uncouple from them and treat them with a bit more suspicion. So our drives, our emotions, and all the unconscious processes that try to push us in certain directions.
So the way to save humanity is to turn it into something else.
Yeah. So yes. In a way, this would be this kind of science fiction, psychosociological bet that in order to survive, we have to evolve both psycho and sociological mechanisms beyond our biological inputs.
Yes, like humanity needs to be like the grandfather axe. This is my grandfather axe. I've had it for 40 years. Only I have replaced the blade, and my father has replaced the handle.
Okay.
That's the axe of Theseus, is what you're talking about.
Yeah. So kind of replace itself without noticing it. Okay, that's great. And we have one question or suggestion from Peter. Could you show us your cat?
Which one? I have 4.
All.
Hang on. I'll just hang on.
Yeah, we are waiting. No problem. And in the meantime, the rest of the panelists could think about the question about if we are to change the human nature or the fabric of societies,
This is Bog.
Whoa! Yeah.
That's short for big orange guy.
Yeah.
He's a derp.
As always.
This is Blubbery Panda. She is extremely overweight. She is a complete chonk. She used to belong to this homeless schizophrenic guy who set fires in our backyard. He does not know that we have him, but we saved her life.
Yeah.
I have this urge to take my dog in the form of protest and show you.
Yeah, bring it on, bring it on.
I'm dog person, wait a minute.
Bring all the pets. This is the right time. Oh, a grey one.
This is Nutmeg. She is the junior emissary from Moo.
Yeah.
And hello.
It's a beauty.
Here's a donut.
Ah, doggo.
Yeah. Hi, it's a dog. His name is Donut, Ponczek, and he doesn't really like when I take him like that. But
Thank you for your service.
yeah, but he will live.
Yeah. Is this a raccoon? No, it's a cat.
We also
No,
have,
he uses my keyboard. Abort the mission. Abort
Okay.
the mission.
So the last question that we kind of skimmed through, if you have to imagine, or two questions actually, if you have to imagine this possible species or kind of, a way to change the nature of human or the fabric of society, whatever you call it, method, would it be rather kind of neurochemical or social manipulatory digital whatever? So basically, would you try to manipulate the chemistry of our brain or surroundings of humans?
one.
And the obvious answer is
go.
why not both?
I would. I think it's perfectly possible to change human nature to some extent by conditioning. I mean, we don't have, for example, an instinct towards racism, as far as anybody knows. What we have is a kind of a xenophobic aversion to things that we weren't familiar with growing up. So if you grow up in a multicultural environment, you're much less likely to be racist than if you grow up in an all, sort of a monoculture and then encounter people from different ethnicities. So we do have an inherent ability to learn and to imprint on stuff. So that's possible. The problem with something like that is that because it's so fluid, it can be easily hacked. There will always be cheaters in there who can game that system. I think it would be more effective to change us on the neurochemical level, but good luck getting anybody to vote for that as a kind of a campaign platform. You'd probably have to do it as a, some kind of a bioterrorist adding stuff to the water supply. I have no idea how you could pull something like that off.
And we do not endorse these tactics.
I do think digitization holds some potential, but that is basically the focus of my talk on Sunday, so I'm not going to talk about it now.
Okay. Perhaps Magdalena?
Yeah, like Peter said, it's really hard to implement that kind of system. Actually, Limes Inferior by Zarod is a little bit about that, because there's a system that at first looks like it's working, but there are some people that use the system against the system, but then it's revealed that the system managers know that about those people that break the system, and they allow them to break the system because without it the system won't work. So it's kind of bureaucratic mess down there, and I think it would be similar with this kind of
it's actually a classical problem with or classical division line between old-time sociological theories and the newer ones. The old-time sociological theories didn't really have this clear vision what would be the mechanism of change after the change has happened. And the division between more modern and postmodern theories or predictions in social science. Okay, maybe Krysia or Wojtek? If you have to change human nature, would you rather manipulate biochemistry of a brain? Or
No, in this matter, I'm the kind of 19th century old school humanist. I believe that creating better society will make better human beings, and that's where I stop. Like no, because I don't believe in infallibility of any social reform. So whatever we do should be reversible. So changing brains on chemical levels might be irreversible, and that's too scary. And social reform, if it goes wrong, could be at least in theory taken back. So no chemical brain intervention for me. I will always vote against it. But building better society should create better humans. That's my hope. That's my belief. And if not, its life is not worth having. So let's keep to this hope.
Yeah, I actually agree with Wojciech that better society, better education, healthcare proves to just create better society itself, right?
Okay,
if we are
let us hear from Krysia.
Yeah, sorry, I just agree.
It's all right. I hogged enough limelight as it is.
Okay, so we don't have.
No, I just wanted to say. I just wanted to tell Magda not to feel bad about having something to say.
Okay.
Once in a while.
We are coming to an end of the panel. We more or less run through all the questions.
But hey, I have something to mention. I think a good example of engineering positive social change through legal means rather than bioengineering and chemical manipulation is the smoking ban.
Mm-hmm. The what?
The smoking ban in bars. When it was introduced at the beginning of the zeros, very few people believed that it would be effective. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people argued that non-smoking bars are not needed, because if there was a need for places where people do not smoke cigarettes, well, some entrepreneurial chaps would just come up and create those bars, right? And people would want to come to those bars because they would like to have fun in a non-smoking environment. And the absence of such non-smoking bars is the ultimate proof that people do not want them. And 20 years forward, and it is completely normal for people that bars are places where you do not smoke cigarettes. If you want a cigarette, you go outside, and it's amazing how fast the social habits changed. Yeah. So I'm deeply suspicious of neuroengineering and chemical manipulation, because yes, once it's irreversible and it can never be properly investigated for long-term adverse effects. So I would rather try to change people's habits by introducing new regulation and just get them to be used to it. And I know that free will is an illusion. We're all governed by primitive, animalistic, Stone Age impulses, but getting to gradually accept new standards give me an illusion that it is me who chooses to adapt to the new regulation.
But with the bars, that's a good example, because in the past, cigarettes were cool, actually, right? When we were young, it was like the cool kids are smoking. And now it's just unhealthy, bad habits. So maybe we should proof that being bad is unhealthy, being good is healthy. You know, you will live to 200 lives.
Yeah, but what I got out of this story, similar to the story of acid rains or ozone layer crisis, is that sometimes as a humanity we get together to discuss something, and we do some political decisions on a global level, and they have global consequences, and things get better.
Yeah, the thing about the ozone layer though was that it didn't actually take that much effort to fix. It was a fairly easy. Nobody really lost their standard of living as a result of that.
It's not really a problem to construct a counter argument.
But we really need a selfish reason to change for better. That's that's a painful truth. But we need this selfish reason that, like with cigarettes, they're unhealthy, they are killing you. That's why you don't smoke, not because somebody else doesn't like it.
The change with the cigarettes wasn't based on a singular selfish or not selfish decisions. It was just a policy adopted or enforced by a state that had enough trust or enough fear.
When cigarettes
recognized.
were at first, cigarettes were promoted as something healthy. Smoke cigarettes
and it took us 100 years and 50 years of knowledge of the nicotine effects from the lung cancer to change it. I know it.
Yeah, but that's kind of, that's the egoistic, selfish reason to not do bad thing. I don't want a lung cancer. Maybe I love to smoke, but I don't want it. And that can make change in my life, big change. Someone telling me just, it's unmoral. I know sweets are bad for me, but it's still really hard to surpass the urge to eat those.
Here's an interesting thought experiment. Supposing that when you smoked, you didn't get cancer, but somebody in the third world did. Supposing that the price you paid for your pleasure was borne by somebody else that you would never meet. That's functionally equivalent to every time somebody buys a pair of Nike running shoes, or every time somebody buys an iPhone that was built in China where they have to stick up suicide nets because the conditions in the factories are so onerous. Maybe that's the situation we should be looking for. Not ones that say, if I smoke, I will die a slow, painful death of cancer, because there's a really obvious connection there. But if I do something, somebody else will suffer. That's going to be a lot harder, I think, to sell people on, because people are fundamentally selfish bastards that don't care about people on the other side of the world.
The funny thing is that 15 years ago, most of the population weren't smokers, but we are conditioned to believe that smoking was a holy thing that we shouldn't hamper or interrupt in any way. I have a cookbook that is about 10 years old, and it says 12 maybe, and it says it has instructions on how to throw a good party. And the author of the book explicitly states that if we invite any people who are smokers, we have to take into account the fact that our guests would sometimes need to have a smoke to be comfortable, and we absolutely shouldn't ask them to go outside onto the terrace or balcony, because that's rude.
So let's end on this note. Perhaps
wait. So here is where the analogy comes in. Most of us, I know that there are people like the Koch brothers who profit from the coal industry being what it is today, being this huge giant industry that is worth a lot of money. And the fact is, most of the world population aren't Koch brothers, and we are not profiting from the coal industry being what it is.
But we don't get a say. I mean, Piketty basically has pointed out that North America does not have a functioning democracy and has not for generations. If you define democracy as a situation in which the majority of the people get what they want, what's happening, at least in the US, and I would argue also in Canada, is that when when the majority of people want something that powerful plutocrats don't want. They don't get their way. That's a pretty it's a pretty twisted view of democracy to say that. I mean, the Koch brothers, a vote by the Koch brothers counts more than 10 million votes by you or I.
Yeah, and we could as easily go to the next panel, but let us end on this note. Perhaps there are things that get older faster than science fiction, and that could be the party manuals. So thank you for the panel. Thank you for the questions. It was a lovely evening. Have a good fun on Konline. And if you wish to kind of, stay, hang out, have a beer, get together, please move to the Discord. Okay? And just take one of the chat rooms on Discord, and that would be the future fate of the panel. Zephyr, do you have anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to drop in and thank you very much. It was like getting Wojtek and getting Peter was like one of the personal things I wanted to do, and when Marcin came and got Krysia to this panel too, and completely made it look much better than previously. It was wonderful. It was like a perfect thing I wanted to have on my convention. So I'm very, very glad to have you all here. It's sad it's only in virtual, but I guess this is the best thing we have in these sad times.
So one more thing, as a moderator, if you had fun on this panel and you wish to thank either panelists or organizers, could you use the option to raise the hand on Jitsi? It's on the bottom left level, and here we could see the hands, and it would be an imitation of clapping or any kind of.
Nobody's clapping. I'm not seeing anybody clapping.
Yeah, and we are start seeing it.
Yeah, that's
Perhaps
clapping in sign language. So clapping.
Yeah. So that would be also the anarchist.
Oh yeah, there they all are.
Feedback. Okay, so at least not everybody got asleep, which also counts as success. Thank you very much. If you wish to continue, get to Discord, enjoy Konline, and be well, safe travel, and have a good day and good evening.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye,
I miss Poland. Poland is great. I wish I could be back, but I can't. It was fun.
We miss you. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.